All right, welcome back to the next episode of the. Welcome to the next episode on our YouTube or our podcast, depending when you're listening to it. So, this was primarily recorded with me in mind on Gurf Solo Radios. No fits today. This is just me talking about a little bit thing I've been thinking about for a while. So, this is obviously, if you're listening, you'll know where you're listening to. But if you're listening to this on the usual podcast mediums, I would highly recommend that you go look at the YouTube version of this, because I'm going to have some video footage of baby Gurf training and kind of evolving throughout the years, and you'll be able to see me as baby Gurf, of course, which was much smaller, about 25 kilos smaller, and you'll be able to see me without a beard, which is not something you want to see. It'll be funny for you, but not for me. So this episode is 5 things I wish I knew about weightlifting when I started. Essentially 5 things I wish I could go back and tell myself. Wish is a strong word, it makes it seem like a regret, but 5 things that would have been very handy if I knew that I could go back and tell myself, even up in the recent years, like last year, the year before even. So I'm going to come in at number 5. These are not in any particular order, but number 1 is probably the most important, and they all kind of tie into each other. But 5, I'm just going to start with number 5, and that is the back squat is not as important as I thought it was. So of course, these are not things I wish every amateur knew. I think these are very specific to me. So throughout my career of weightlifting, there was times where I spent too much time, too many resources, too much mental energy, too much physical energy, too much just basically training time in itself, like hours of training volume. Too much of that was spent on just focusing on the back squat. And what I mean by that is I spent too focused on the back squat to the detriment of my snatch, clean and jerk. Now, my thought process, and a lot of people's thought process, especially in the Western world, kind of in more amateur weightlifting scenes, was that we think that a bigger back squat equals a bigger snatch and clean and jerk. Because all the best have big back squats, so we assume if we get a big back squat, we'll get the big snatch and clean and jerk faster. But, for example, I think there's a study the Bulgarians did where they studied the numbers of their back squats and their best snatchers. And their best snatchers had the biggest back squats. But that was one of those tropes that we all frequently hear about, and that is the correlation, not causation effect. So basically it was not a causatory effect. So having a big back squat in itself does not make you a big snatcher. Otherwise, we would have just loads of powerlifters coming to weightlifting and snatching huge weights, but which we know does not happen. So I spent throughout my career of weightlifting so far too many hours and points. So for example, the most extreme point where I should not have, and I did not need to, was when I was back squatting 270. So I got to 270 with fairly reasonable intensities in terms of training resources allocated to back squatting. I got there fairly reasonably, I think. Not a crazy detriment to my lifts. My lifts are still going up nicely up until that point. And then when I got to the point where I went from 270 to 290 in the space of 3 to 4 months, I think, it really negatively affected my lifts and essentially stalled the progression of my lifts for no reason. So my thought process was, if I get a bigger back squat, if I get like north of 300, I'll have enough of a back squat forever, essentially. But there is one major flaw in that thought process. And it boils down to the fact that you need to bring up your snatch and clean and jerk while increasing your back squat. So in my head, I was like, look, I'll get to 300 really fast, or 290 or 310 or whatever it was, just a fucking big number really fast. And then I'll go back to the snatch, clean and jerk, and I'll be able to increase them really quickly. They'll jump up a lot faster themselves. And no shocker, because this is 5 things I wish I knew. That's not what happened. My snatch and clean and jerk basically stayed the same from 270 to 290. It just detrimentally affected my snatch, clean and jerk for a short period because I'd wasted too many training hours. For example, if you spend a day where you're doing a heavy 5x5, everybody knows that will take a lot of energy. Like a really heavy 5x5 can take upwards of an hour. Lots of energy in terms of physical and mental capacity. So for a couple of months I was doing lots of volume in the squats, really heavy, and obviously that works great for a squat if you can handle it, but I was left with no mental capacity to approach the lifts. I was left with very little physical energy to attack the lift. So on days I was too tired because I was focusing on the back squat, I was left with no mental drive to go for big snatches or focus on technique because I was just too fucked. My body was too tired because of trying to learn and hold positions of heavy weights was too hard because I was fatigued, like upper body, central nervous system fatigue, lower body are all too tired to learn how to snatch, clean, jerk properly and fast. So I was leaving myself with basically, I was taking steps backwards and trying to learn to snatch, clean, jerk. If I was smarter, I would have realised that while my lifts were still going up at 270, I should have just left it at 270 and very cautiously progressed my back squat up to maybe like 280 and very slowly, but instead of going from 3 to 4 months, it probably could have taken up to a year, no problem, maybe even 2 years. So what I would have done differently, I was just keep training the way it was when I got to 270. So to get up to 270 required fairly moderate effort. Like I was able to improve my snatch, clean, jerk fairly consistently at a very solid rate, I feel, for my training age. And my back squat was still improving nicely, and along with my front squat, without some crazy effort into the back squat. Rather than spending too much time in the back squat and leaving myself with basically nowhere to go with the snatch, clean, and jerk. So I would take that into account if you feel. So it's unlikely again that this is something a lot of you will need to worry about, because it's unlikely your back squat is close to 290 or 300. But just be careful that spending too much time not on the snatch and clean and jerk, is it really going to help your lifts? And it very well may. Let's say if you're front squatting like 120 kilos and your best clean and jerk is 118 kilos, then there's a fairly solid argument for spending 2 or 3 months maybe on a more of a squat focused for a little bit, but not a massive focus. But for a time, there is a reasonable argument to spend doing that. But one of the mistakes I made, and this will lead us into point 4, was more body weight is not always a positive aspect. So one of the things while I was back squatting heavy was I gained a lot of body weight. So my heaviest when I was doing that was nearly, I think for one day I was like 112 kilos, and I am 5'8". Now 5'8" and 112 kilos in general is not ideal unless you're a pro bodybuilder and you're on a lot of gear, and I am not a pro bodybuilder or on a lot of gear. So at the time that was not comfortable. Basically I lost all mobility. Like, for example, one day I was snatching with Clarence. He came to visit. I remember he was like warming up, and I was warming up my snatch as well, and we were warming up in the same bar. And I was like, fuck, this is super uncomfortable. I ended up muscle snatching 110 kilos that day just because it was just too uncomfortable to do full snatches. My mobility was vastly reduced. My speed was massively reduced. My ability to get in good positions was massively reduced. So not only had I wasted time and energy trying to increase my back squat unnecessarily, I'd also increased my body weight and really, really reduced my athleticism. Two of which are, well, number one, athleticism is incredibly important to the sport of weightlifting. So a lot of times we make the mistake of thinking that, I made a mistake again, so these are very direct to me, but hopefully you can find something in them, was that I made the mistake of thinking that more body weight would make me stronger and therefore better at the lifts. Well, in fact, it really reduced my speed, my ability to be fast, get into good positions, and essentially just wasted a couple of months getting really strong. Now, you may say, maybe now it's helping me, but I genuinely think my lifts would be farther on now, and it's not something I regret. I'm not bemoaning it. It's just, it is as it happens. There's literally no reason. I thoroughly enjoyed back squatting heavy. I really, really enjoy it. There's time when I did things like 200 for 19 reps. I miscounted and thought I did 20, or 220 for 14 reps, or 240 for 9, or pause squatting 270, or back squatting 219 itself. Like, I really enjoyed that training, and it's not something I regret. But in terms of snatch, clean, jerk, and luckily I'm at a point where I still have plenty of time to progress still and rectify my mistakes. But it's valuable information, I think, for people listening, and if they see themselves in their own career. So as a result, that brings us to point number 3. So if we're at number 5, I tried to back squat too much. As a result of that, I tried to gain too much weight, and it really reduced my general athleticism. It brought us to number 3. and that is speed is key. Now, speed is so important, no matter what weight class you're in, no matter what weights you're lifting. Being as fast as you possibly can is one of the most important things in weightlifting. Now, this is something I knew on the periphery. I was aware of this fact that fast weightlifters were good weightlifters, but I did not pay enough credence to this. And as from point 5 and 4, I back squatted too much, so I was too fatigued to be fast. Now, the actual act of having a big back squat doesn't make you slower, but the process of getting there makes you much slower. And the more body weight you carry, the more body weight you have to move, which makes it harder to be faster. Now, it doesn't mean you'll be slow, but it does mean you have a harder chance of being a fast lifter, depending on your body weight and your height. So, as I mentioned, I was 5'8" and 110 kilos on average, and that was not making for a fast lift, even though I was strong. So speed was not something I was paying much attention to, like actively trying to move the bar fast, actively doing plyometrics, doing speed training, doing fast reps, but fast, obviously perfect reps. So one of the things I didn't really realize, or one of the things I didn't really kind of mold into a concept in my brain, was that some positions are only useful while moving at speeds in weightlifting. And I know that sounds kind of dumb when you think about it, because obviously you can move through these positions, perfect positions, if you're going really slow, but obviously you won't generate any power with those. But knowing something and actively acknowledging something is not the same thing. So I left my speed, and I was a very quick lifter at points throughout my career, and I always showed basically key indicators of being fast. And my jumping before I started weightlifting was quite good. My vertical jump was nearly shoulder height onto, not a vertical jump, onto a box jump. So when I was like 17, so these were good indicators for weightlifting. But to my detriment, obviously, I'd let my back squat and my body weight really hindered number 3, which is the speed is the key. So some of the positions, for example, which are really important, is like speed moving from the knee to full extension to getting the bar over the head. And the faster you can lift the weight, the more weight you can lift. Now, that's not the same as putting maximum force into a bar. Being fast around the bar, we're talking about just as much as your body being fast and moving around the bar as it is moving the bar to speed. So while I was very strong and I could apply high forces to the bar, I couldn't move very fast because my body was not that of a quality athlete. I was just a little thicky, and that is one of the reasons I became known as the Irish Fridge, when quite the, I suppose, many people's amusement and the memes, but not to the amusement of my snatch and clean and jerk. So some of the things I am doing differently, basically, and I'll kind of sum those up at the end, was that I really think it's important to try be fast. Now, I know a lot of you listening are beginner or amateur weightlifters, or you're in the first year or 2 or even 3. Now, speed, while very important, needs to be in the right positions, but there'll come a time in your career, and you'll have a decent idea of this, is that you need to start learning to be fast. So obviously you need to learn the perfect positions first, and it's much easier to learn them if you're moving slow. But there was times in my career as well where I spent too many times doing too many reps. So for example, even up until last year, I think I did 145 for a double. My best single is 151. Now, that's not a good ratio, but I spend a lot of time doing reps and never really transitioning into singles, which is what weightlifting is a 1RM snatch and a 1RM clean and jerk. And while I got very good at doubles, I got good at slow doubles. You know, those kind of doubles where it's just ropey as fuck. While I should have transitioned to a period where I was focusing on being fast, doing singles, trying to make my technique as optimal as I could for speed, optimize it for being a fast lifter. The faster you are, the lower you can lift the bar height, and the lower you can lift bars while still making successful snatches and clean and jerks. In theory, the more you can snatch and clean and jerk. So the heavier weights don't need to be pulled as high, and if you can get under them faster, you can in theory lift them more. And it was something I was neglecting. Now, following on from number 3, speed is key. Number 2 was don't neglect your hamstrings, Gurf, and that was something I did very, very, very strongly. Essentially, I neglected my hamstrings for nearly 8 and a bit years, I suppose, 8 and a bit years now at this stage. So one of the things this ties into point 5 and 3. So your hamstrings are directly related to how fast you can be in the snatch and the clean and jerk. So your snatch and your clean and jerk are related to your hamstrings, because your hamstrings are what's known as a biarticular muscle, which means they basically control two different joints. They control your hip and your knee. Now, your hip and your knee are very important joints for jumping and weightlifting, and jumping is correlated with good weightlifting. Now, I heavily neglected my hamstrings from number 5 because I focused too much on squats and didn't build my posterior chain. I did not match the volume. I did hardly any pulls. I did no RDLs. I did no stiff-legged deadlifts. And it left me with a very big imbalance. Your hamstrings are used from the point where your knee moves backwards. When the bar is at the knee, your knees are moving backwards and your hamstrings are taking the load, and then they are switching from contraction to relaxation when your quads are re-engaging. And now the faster and the more powerful you can do this, the faster and more you can lift, again in theory. Now, having a massively imbalanced is never good for, of course, any kind of injury, but it's also not good for power production, because your body essentially limits, your central nervous system limits your maximum speed by the weakest muscle in that chain. So my hamstrings were much, much weaker than my quads, basically, which was leaving me with kind of a ropey long extension in the snatch and the clean and jerk, which was not good. One of the effects of having poor hamstring strength was that in the dip and the drive, my knee control was not as good as it should be. So while I had quite strong quads, and they in itself were kind of controlling my direction during the dip, my knees, I was not producing as much power as I could have been, I think. Currently at the moment, I have reduced my body weight from down to 100 kilos on average, from say 112 2 years ago down to 100 kilos now, say from 108 last year, 106 maybe. I'm a lot more athletic. Obviously my back squat and front squat aren't as big, but I'm a lot faster. My technique's getting better. My jumps are getting way better. That's one of the things I would kind of tie into the subcategory of part number 2 and train your hamstrings. At the moment, I'm doing jumping 2 to 3 times a week, usually about 3 times a week, and like depth jumps, like bounding, jumping over benches, long jumps, no box jumps. We'll get into that another time. But lots of jumping. My jumping's getting better. My snatch is getting better. It's slowly catching up, and I've neglected my hamstrings for a long time. So I'm also doing stiff-legged deadlifts from a 20-kilo plate 3 to 4 times a week, and I'm doing a little bit more volume. And I'm doing a lot more volume in those than I'm in my front squat. Not back squatting at all at the moment is another one of the things. So I suppose one of the bright sides of having that larger back squat was I removed I can remove back squat now, and I don't need to focus. One of the benefits was that I could remove back squats now, and I do not need to place any effort into those. And at some point I'll return to them later in my career when I feel like I've done what I need to do in the snatch and the clean and jerk, or maybe little points throughout the year when I just want to do a bit of kind of general training, a little bit GPP, and I will progress it a little bit, but I won't really try and increase my max. I'll just do them for some of the benefits of doing back squats. But right now it's all front squats, front squat every day, and very little volume, like just moderate intensity, about 110% of my clean and jerk, or what I've clean jerked recently. And I'm hitting the hamstrings very hard. In terms of this jumps as well, I use speed as the key indicator of those. So if I start jumping and they feel really slow, I just stop doing them. Now we'll come to the last point, and this is number 1. And there was a lot of things I was going to call this kind of the right thing at the right time, or kind of, you know, what's needed when it's needed. But really what this sums itself up to is specificity is key. Specificity is king, I suppose, because I said speed is key, so specificity is king. And this kind of ties all of the back squat, speed, hamstring, body weight, all of those above into one, really. And that is specificity, facilitating your training around doing as much snatch and clean and jerk as you possibly can, and from the floor for singles. So that is your goal, is to just do snatch and clean and jerk as much as you can, as often as you can, as many reps as you can do at 90% or above as frequently as you can without getting injured or fatiguing yourself too much. So there was points, for example, obviously, so number 5, where back squat is not as important as I thought it was. I would say that is clearly very obvious that too much back squats. I was not being specific. I was not trying to return to kind of homeostasis, which is doing snatch and clean and jerk from the floor for a single as much as I can. That was the exact opposite. I was totally detrimental to that. But that is also kind of in more nuanced ways. Like, for example, last year I got my snatch balance up to 190 kilos, and to be honest, I just didn't need to do that. That was a similar effect to the back squat. If I'd just stopped at 170 for a double, that was more than enough. That was plenty of overhead strength, plenty of lockout strength that I didn't need to do it, and I wasted more time again. So if you think about all the exercises you're doing and think about them as kind of mental, physical capital all into one resources, kind of, if you've listened to the podcast before, we've talked about kind of like kids' toy blocks and their kind of resources. The more time you spend on anything that's not the snatch, clean and jerk, and if snatch, clean, jerk is your main goal, the more time you spend on not doing those, the more you're wasting blocks to do the snatch, clean and jerk. So for example, snatch balancing 190 kilos takes a lot of mental energy in a session. Like, mental energy is kind of hype, kind of focus on the snatch balance left me, again, similar to back squat. Going for really heavy snatch balance for reps was taking away my focus on the lifts. I was focusing on the technique. The snatch balance focus on the technique of the mental hype I needed to do a snatch balance at 190 kilos. And again, I really enjoyed snatch balancing. It was fun. It felt good. I was good at it. But it ultimately distracted from just doing snatch and clean and jerk. And there was times where I got a very good hang snatch much earlier in my career, and there was just no need. So kind of what I would look from this is, let's say I did a better example of this was when I did it right was a couple of months ago. My snatch push press was terrible. It would have to be a great day before I could do 150, and which would be 1 kilo under my best snatch, which is not okay. You should be able to do your best snatch for at least 2 or 3 reps. And I worked up to 160 for a triple, and it felt great. And then I left it, and that was it. That was done. I just stopped one day. I did it for 5 to 6 weeks. It got way better. I was very happy with it. And then I dropped it and I let it go, and that was it. So that was kind of a better example of when I did do this right. So I did do my snatch, clean and jerk. I gave them priority. So like at the moment, my snatch and clean and jerk training, my entire training, is centered around just doing snatch and clean and jerk for singles. There's a little bit of doubles the odd time, but it's all about snatch, clean, jerk. No back squats. I'm still focusing on my hamstrings. I really need to. There's no hangs variation. There's some powers, which I would still consider snatch, clean, jerk. But again, if I needed another variation, let's say for 5 or 6 weeks, I needed to do, like, let's say for some reason, and now I don't, but at another point in my career, let's say I needed to do hang snatches. And I needed to, let's say it was vastly underneath my snatch clean jerk. Let's say it was 50 kilo under my snatch. Let's say I could barely hang snatch 100 kilos. I would add back in hang snatch maybe once a week and improve it to a point where I felt like I could hang snatch same as my full snatch, and then I would drop it. I wouldn't need it. Last year and the year before, I put way too much emphasis on, 2 years ago, apologies, on my hang snatch, and I equaled my lifts, but there was just no need. I was spending way too much time 2 years ago, actually, I put the detriment of my snatch clean jerk again. So I got really good at hang snatch. I got really good at low hang snatch. I did like 150 on both of those on multiple occasions, and it was of no benefit to my snatch clean jerk. Now, if I could stop when I knew I could have done 150, but I didn't need to do it. The act of doing it is not important. Being able to do it, if you think about it, will this positively impact my lift, or will this neutrally impact my lift, or negatively? And in this case, it was just, after a certain point, it was just, I was breaking even. I was not gaining into my snatch. I wasn't losing anything in my snatch, not as much as it would have been, say, for example, of the back squat. But I wasn't really gaining anything. I was gaining no more positive impact after I could have done. So when I did 130 a few times, I knew I could do 150 and I pushed it when there was just literally no need to. I should have gone straight back to full snatch, full clean and jerk again. Again, right now and it always should be, is that you're trying to get as close as you can to snatch, clean and jerk. Now, that might take years for some people listening. It may be literally a case of, for some more advanced people listening, it might be a case of 6 weeks of doing something, like just focus on your snatch, grip, strict press for 6-8 weeks, or focusing on your push press for 5 or 6 weeks or something like that, and then go back to your snatch, clean, jerk, or whatever variation or whatever template you are in your training. Sometimes for some people, and this is 100% okay, is that you may feel like that if you remove high hand cleans, your clean just goes to shit, and then you learn, and that's as close as you can get to highly specific, and then you leave it. And that is totally okay. Like, for example, if you take Miso Asana, he really likes hand cleans, really feels they help his clean and jerk, and he does them a lot, and he's clean and jerking 228 kilos in competition, and Jesus Christ, that's all right by me. So, but there may be, and obviously there's a lot of amateurs lifting, intermediate lifters. You may literally be 5 years away from being very specific in your training, and that is no problem, as long as you're aware that your ultimate goal is to do snatch, clean and jerk. Now, most people listening won't be ready for that, but it's good to have that in mind. It's good to have in your thoughts that you will ultimately be looking to do snatch, clean, jerk as much as possible and removing all their exercises. That is the ultimate goal. And I think that people kind of lose sight of that with their programming, or even their careers as a whole, until they look back. Or some people may never know why. All right. I'm going to end this here because that's gone on way longer than I thought it would. I'm going to need to find a lot of footage. I hope you enjoyed listening. Thanks for listening to this episode if you're on the podcast, and thanks for watching if you're watching YouTube. And again, if you are on the podcast, I would definitely recommend going and watching the YouTube. Thanks for listening.